Something remarkable is unfolding in southern Africa, a development that could reshape the region forever. Three nations, Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana, have joined forces to create a bold new alliance, one with ambitions that extend far beyond traditional diplomacy. Imagine an Africa where citizens can travel freely from one country to another, unburdened by visa restrictions, long queues, or bureaucratic red tape. A southern Africa where borders exist only on maps, not in reality. At the center of this audacious vision is Namibia's fearless president, Nandi Ndaith. Since taking office in March, President Nandi Ndaith has made waves with a series of bold, unapologetic moves that reflect her defiant spirit and unyielding commitment to African unity. She has proven that when it comes to challenging entrenched systems and pursuing transformative change, she is not afraid to take risks. But what does this ambitious plan actually involve? How will it impact ordinary Africans traveling across the region? And perhaps most importantly, what do other African countries think of this unprecedented alliance? In this video, we'll break down the strategy, explore the potential economic and political ripple effects, and examine whether this bold initiative could finally bring the dream of a borderless Southern Africa closer to reality. Before President Nandi Ndaith assumed office, the dream of a borderless Africa starting from Namibia had already begun taking shape. The first public glimpse of this ambitious vision came on October 24, 2023, during Namibia's 59th Independence Day celebration in Windhoek, a day already steeped in pride, history, and reflection. But this year, the celebrations carried an extraordinary promise for the future of the region. During the ceremony, Namibia's Minister of Home Affairs, Safety and Security, Albert Kawana, unveiled a groundbreaking initiative that, if fully implemented, could rewrite the rules of African mobility. With a tone that combined optimism and determination, the minister revealed plans that would allow Zambian nationals to enter Namibia using nothing more than their national ID cards. "We are working to phase out the requirement for passports between our two countries," he stated, signaling a radical shift from decades of rigid border controls. Imagine traveling across southern Africa without the endless paperwork, without expensive visa fees, without the constant uncertainty of whether you'll be allowed to cross. This wasn't just a policy proposal, it was a vision for a new Africa, one where mobility, opportunity, and regional integration are no longer confined to lofty speeches, but are tangible realities for ordinary citizens. Before the Europeans ever set foot on African soil, the continent thrived in its own way. Africans traded freely with one another, moving along established routes that had existed for centuries. Markets flourished, kingdoms prospered, and communities could settle, migrate, or expand without unnecessary restrictions. Life, in many ways, was connected, fluid, and self-sustaining. Then came a group of outsiders, people who had never truly known the land, its peoples, or its histories. Yet, driven by greed and imperial ambition, they drew lines on maps with a single goal: to carve Africa into pieces they could control. These hastily drawn boundaries became artificial borders, splitting kingdoms, merging rival tribes, and ignoring centuries of culture, language, and tradition. These lines were never meant to unify. They were tools of manipulation, a foundation for the divide and rule policies that would plague the continent for generations. One of the most devastating consequences of these borders was their impact on African mobility and trade. The once thriving network of internal trade routes was deliberately ignored, replaced by channels that funneled resources out of Africa and into European markets. The continent's wealth was extracted and its people were restricted, all in service of foreign enrichment. Movement that had once been natural, effortless, and profitable for Africans was now obstructed by arbitrary boundaries and bureaucratic hurdles, reshaping the continent to serve the ambitions of others rather than its own people. When colonialism finally ended and African nations were granted self-governance, the continent stood at a historic crossroads, a moment brimming with opportunity. The founding fathers of Africa could have erased the artificial scars of colonial borders, creating a united and powerful continent capable of determining its own destiny. On one side stood Kwame Nkrumah, the visionary president of Ghana. In his famous "Africa Must Unite" speech, Nkrumah passionately argued for continental federalism, a bold plan for a union of African states. He envisioned a single continental diplomatic corps, a unified Department of Defense, and a shared economic market that could rival the West. This was the same dream that Muammar Gaddafi later championed, advocating for a Pan-African federation before he was brutally removed by the United States and France. Imagine the possibilities if this vision had been realized. Africa, standing strong and united, shaping its own future instead of being fragmented and manipulated by external powers. But the dream was denied. Most of the other founding fathers rejected Nkrumah's call for unity. They were unwilling to cede sovereignty, unwilling to share power. They looked at the post-war West, where nations jealously guarded their independence, and thought, "We will be rulers of our own kingdoms, not of a united continent." And so, instead of a bold union of African states, Africa settled for the Organization of African Unity, an institution that, while symbolic, lacked the real teeth to forge the kind of continental integration Nkrumah had envisioned. The decision marked a turning point, one that would shape Africa's political, economic, and social trajectory for decades to come. But today, it's clear that their decision to reject Nkrumah's vision was a costly mistake. Thanks to those arbitrary borders, it's often easier for a European to travel to an African country than for an African to travel to another African country. Think about that for a second. It's almost as if Africans trust foreigners more than they trust each other. Isn't that absurd? Borders haven't just restricted movement, they've crippled intra-African trade. While trade with the rest of the world flourishes, commerce between African nations remains surprisingly low. And yet, Africa is the second largest market on the planet, second only to Asia. In theory, African countries don't even need foreign markets to thrive, they have each other. But the borders push nations to look outward, to chase foreign investors and distant markets, rather than to strengthen their own regional economies. This inward neglect has real consequences. Take, for example, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa. When Trump imposed trade tariffs, South Africa was forced to send its president personally to the United States to plead for relief. What did he get for this humiliation? Nothing but the highest trade tariffs in Africa, imposed with cold calculation. This is the result of a continent divided by invisible lines, lines that continue to empower outsiders at the expense of Africans themselves. Here's the interesting part. Even though the US is South Africa's biggest trading partner, it only accounts for 8% of the country's total exports. In other words, the impact of those punitive tariffs shouldn't have been so catastrophic. But now, imagine a different scenario. What if South Africa's largest trading partner wasn't a Western power, but a fellow African country, say Nigeria or Ghana? Do you think Nigeria would wake up one morning and impose tariffs on South Africa over an internal issue that doesn't concern them? Absolutely not. This illustrates a hard truth. Relying on the West for trade has left African nations vulnerable to the whims of global powers. Africa's economy is heavily tilted toward imports, while exports remain dominated by primary commodities: oil, gas, minerals, and cash crops. On the import side, African countries buy a wide range of goods, from essential products not locally produced, like certain foods, medicines, and pharmaceuticals, to capital goods and energy. A large portion of these come from China and other major economies of the global north. Because African countries are relatively small players in global trade, they rarely control the prices of what they buy or sell. They are price takers in world markets, forced to accept the conditions set by dominant economies. And with global prices denominated in major reserve currencies, local African currencies constantly face pressure, leaving economies exposed to external shocks beyond their control. However, Africa's local currencies wouldn't face the same pressure if trade were conducted between African countries. Doesn't this make the point clear? Trade within the continent must be prioritized over trade with the outside world. Yet, here we are, still trapped in a mindset imposed by colonial masters and reinforced by arbitrary borders. Africans continue to prioritize foreign investors over fellow African investors. Colonialism didn't just take land, it planted an inferiority complex in the minds of Africans, convincing many that a white person's investment is automatically more valuable than that of an African. Many African leaders genuinely believe that foreign investors bring greater benefits to their nations. But history and the current economic reality tells a very different story. These foreign investors profit far more than Africa itself. They gain access to cheap resources, exploit low-cost labor, and craft agreements with the help of elite Western lawyers who manipulate legal systems to their advantage. And the sad truth? Most African leaders are outmatched in this game. The West and Africa do not play by the same rules, and as a result, too many deals are skewed to favor outsiders while local potential remains untapped. But an African would naturally understand a fellow African investor because they share the same language, the same challenges, and often the same vision for the continent. This is why it is imperative for Africa to look inward, to strengthen Africa to Africa relationships, and to prioritize collaboration that benefits the continent first. One bold step in this direction is breaking free from borders that have historically constrained movement, trade, and opportunity. This is precisely what Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana are beginning to do. Back in February 2023, Namibia made history when it announced that Namibia and Botswana would accept each other's national identity cards for cross-border business and tourism travel for stays up to 90 days. Nationals of each country no longer need a passport to enter. Their national ID card also serves as proof of immigration status for business travelers. The goal? To increase economic and regional connectivity, and to encourage orderly, seamless migration. This arrangement made Namibia and Botswana the first countries in Southern Africa to allow cross-border travel using only ID cards. And now, as we mentioned earlier, Namibia and Zambia have signed a similar agreement. According to Namibia's Minister of Home Affairs, the two governments are in the final stages of preparations to roll out the new system. With these moves, Namibia is positioning itself as a pioneer in the Southern African development community, leading the way and promoting free movement, simplified border procedures, and a vision of a more connected, integrated Africa. If successfully implemented, the Zambia-Namibia agreement will become one of the first ID card-based travel corridors in Southern Africa, signaling a bold step toward a more connected and integrated region. Zambia's High Commissioner to Namibia, Stephen Katuka, welcomed the move, highlighting the deep historical and political ties between the two nations. He emphasized Zambia's pivotal support during Namibia's liberation struggle, describing it as a lasting foundation for continued cooperation. The people of Zambia and Namibia share not only borders, but deep-rooted ties built on shared values and mutual respect, Katuka said. But the partnership goes beyond trade and tourism. In a significant humanitarian and judicial development, the two nations have agreed that citizens serving prison sentences in either country can be transferred back home to complete their terms. This step reflects not just cooperation, but a shared commitment to human dignity, regional solidarity, and pragmatic governance. With these initiatives, Zambia and Namibia are setting a precedent, demonstrating that Southern African countries can prioritize regional integration, simplify movement, and build systems that truly serve their citizens. So what can Namibia and Zambia expect to gain from this groundbreaking development? The most immediate benefit is streamlined cross-border travel. Ordinary citizens, especially traders and families with ties on both sides, will no longer be hindered by strict immigration restrictions. In the past, such limitations discouraged many from moving even to neighboring countries. With the new policy, movement is now free, simple, and faster. Secondly, the agreement is set to boost tourism. Easier access encourages short-term travel, cultural exchange, and exploration. Namibia, already renowned for its developed tourist industry, is likely to attract Zambian travelers seeking a change of scenery, adventure, or leisure. Thirdly, the policy will enhance trade, particularly for informal cross-border traders. Previously, logistical and financial hurdles, like passport requirements and long processing times, limited the flow of goods and services. Now, traders can operate more freely, supporting both local economies. Finally, the initiative will reduce administrative burdens for immigration authorities on both sides. By simplifying border procedures and relying on national ID cards, resources can be better allocated, processing times reduced, and efficiency improved. In short, this is more than just a policy. It's a strategic move to strengthen economic ties, cultural exchange, and regional integration, demonstrating the immense potential of Southern African cooperation. Since the announcement of this initiative, business leaders, civil society organizations, and local communities across both Namibia and Zambia have praised the move. They see it as a bold step toward the Southern African Development Community's SADC broader vision of regional integration, economic cooperation, and the free movement of people. But this initiative is more than just a bilateral achievement. It represents a symbol of possibility, a potential blueprint for other African nations, particularly for countries within the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA. It demonstrates that practical steps toward borderless trade and travel can succeed. The AfCFTA, launched in 2018 and operational from 2021, is a landmark agreement that seeks to create the world's largest free trade area, connecting 54 of the 55 African Union nations. Its primary goal is to boost intra-African trade, strengthen economic integration, and promote industrialization by eliminating tariffs and non-tariff barriers. While the AfCFTA is poised to be Africa's gateway to economic transformation, progress has been slower than expected. Challenges such as inconsistent border regulations, limited infrastructure, and entrenched reliance on foreign markets have kept intra-African trade from reaching its full potential. The Namibia-Zambia initiative shows that practical, on-the-ground measures, like using national ID cards for cross-border travel, can accelerate the vision of a more connected, self-reliant Africa. For some reason, many African countries have been slow to fully embrace initiatives that could transform the continent's economic landscape. Take, for example, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS. Launched in 2022 by the African Export-Import Bank in collaboration with the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, PAPS is a cross-border financial market infrastructure designed to simplify payment transactions across Africa, a continent home to over 40 different currencies. According to the Secretary General of the AfCFTA, PAPS has the power to dramatically reduce Africa's dependence on third-party currencies, such as the US dollar or the euro, which have long dominated trade on the continent. More importantly, the system is designed to boost intra-African trade, making it easier for businesses to trade with each other without being hampered by complex currency conversions or excessive banking fees. Yet, despite its clear benefits, adoption has been slow. Many countries remain hesitant, constrained by outdated financial systems, entrenched habits of relying on foreign partners, and a lack of coordinated political will. This reluctance highlights a recurring problem. Africa has the tools to trade freely with itself, but historical, political, and institutional barriers continue to slow progress. Unfortunately, only 16 out of 54 African countries currently use PAPS, and even among these, intra-African trade remains relatively low. For this system to truly succeed, African nations must start trading more with each other, a critical step toward reducing dependence on external markets and the US dollar. The reality is that Africa's growth in trade depends not just on payment and settlement systems, but far more on production capacity, consumption, trade policies, and fiscal frameworks. Yet, the AfCFTA faces serious challenges. Distrust between nations, a private sector that is often underproductive and less innovative, fragile regional economic blocs, and the absence of a cohesive mechanism to navigate a complex and dynamic geopolitical environment. The solution? A borderless Africa. African countries must follow the bold path set by Namibia, Botswana, and Zambia, creating simplified cross-border movement and stronger regional integration. This is the kind of initiative that can finally unlock Africa's enormous potential, making the continent self-reliant, connected, and resilient. What do you think about a borderless Africa? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more insights on Africa's path to economic sovereignty.